So this review is just going to be covering chapters 23 and 24. And so we'll be summarizing some of the concepts from those two chapters, as well as going over a couple of the most missed topics from each of those chapters. So yeah, right. I just said all that. It's fine. So starting off with chapter 23. I'm trying to bring my pen function down, and it's not. One. There it is. Okay. All right. Starting with chapter 23. Let's zoom in a little bit or not. This is killing me. Okay. Starting with chapter 23. Oh my gosh, every time that I try to write on it. Starting with chapter 23, the gut diseases, right? So this is the GI diseases. It's starting off reviewing the gut microbiome, probably the most heavily populated of all the biomes in the whole body. Like we've said before, just in 1 gram of your intestinal contents, you have more microbes than there have ever been people on the entire, planet ever in all of history combined, just in 1 gram of your own gut contents. So pretty impressive. The gut biome is pretty expansive as well. There's a lot of microorganisms that can be found in your biome, and some of those microorganisms are associated with disease. Now, even just having a few of them might not cause disease, but when they overpopulate, you could. For example, C. diff. It isn't abnormal to have a couple of Clostridium difficile, now known as Clostridioides difficile, in your gut microbiome. But when they overpopulate, then that is what leads to the development of pseudomembranous colitis, which is the disease caused by C. diff. So, normal gut biome, it's not just important for creating microbial antagonism, but it's also, remember, taking up stadium seats, preventing other bad guys from populating. It's not just important for that. It's also important for helping you digest your foods because these microbes can break down parts of your food that you can't digest with your normal digestive enzymes and makes the nutrients more bioavailable for you. But they also send signaling molecules that can help with our own development, whether that's development of our immune system or development of mental health or metabolic disorders that are increasingly being connected to our gut microbiome and what makes up our gut microbiome. So all of that stuff is pretty interesting, new scientific stuff that is relevant. As far as the diseases of the gastrointestinal system goes, starting in the mouth, dental caries, which is tooth decay, is easily the most common infectious disease in humans. Oh my gosh. Why? I don't know what is happening here that it's not letting. I've never had this problem before. It just is only letting me bring this down. I don't know. I don't know if it updated and changed it or something. I just need people make notice on me. Um, Anyways, the dental caries is tooth decay. It's most commonly associated with things like Streptococcus mutans and Streptococcus sobrinus, common constituents of the oral microbiome. Often associated with dental caries, we have plaque, which is biofilm formation of bacteria in the oral cavity. And then those bacteria that form the biofilms will go through fermentation. And what's a very common product of fermentation is acid. And so the acid is what eats through the enamel. So eating more sugars actually makes you more likely to have acid production fermentation, leading to destruction of the enamel as a result. So that's important to remember when we're talking about tooth decay. Um, Tooth decay can lead to periodontitis and gingivitis. Gingivitis is what we see in early periodontitis. In periodontitis, we're talking about, inflammation all the tissues in the mouth, and gingivitis is specifically the gums. And so gingivitis is inflammation of the gums. If you do ever floss your teeth and you do see bleeding associated after you floss, that's because of gingivitis. 100% that's the reason. No other reason. I mean, is it possible you could have some sort of oral cancer? Maybe. But otherwise, like 99.9% of gum bleeding, it's gingivitis. I hate to break it to you. And if you're like, oh, it hurts to floss, I don't want to do it, that's because you have gingivitis. Just saying. So just be aware of that. Um, so um, this gingivitis is early stage periodontal disease, and if gingivitis continues, we'll eventually have bone loss in the mouth, and then that would lead to potentially tooth loss in the long term. This is all due to the inflammation associated with the buildup of plaque and calcified plaque tartar within the oral cavity, which can be cleaned with regular dental cleanings. Brushing doesn't get in between your teeth. Flossing is what will get in between your teeth. So regular brushing and flossing and regular dental checkups will be the best at preventing dental caries and eventually gingivitis progressing into periodontal disease. Um, you're more likely to have severe periodontal disease if your normal microbiome includes an archaea. And this is the only archaea that we discuss in the class as far as infectious diseases goes. And that is Methanobrevibacter oralis. It is archaea. It is not a bacteria. And having this archaea species as part of your microbiome predisposes you to having severe periodontal disease. Worse than that, we have trench mouth, which is also known as necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis or periodontitis, depending on the progression of it. And it's usually associated with um, uh, a different kind of bacterial species, so more pathogenic bacterial species like um, um, my brain is having a brain fart right now. Trying to think of it in my brain. Um, Fusobacter necrophorum. Yes. And so that species is more commonly associated with that. We also see that Fusobacter necrophorum associated with um, peritonsillar abscess as well. And so that can be part of your microbiome, but it's more pathogenically associated with these severe sort of necrotizing situations that we have, whether it's trench mouth or whether it is that peritonsillar abscesses that we can see, pretty severe disease associated with those. All right, moving on. Gastric ulcers or having ulcers in your stomach. Usually that is caused by Helicobacter pylori, and about 40% of the human population harbors Helicobacter pylori as part of their biome naturally. And whether or not you get ulcers resulting from this can be related to other environmental factors. But we do see that most gastric ulcers, stomach ulcers, are associated with the presence of this bacteria, Helicobacter pylori, commonly tested for using the presence of testing for the presence of urease, whether that's through the breath test or through culturing. All right, so there was a lot of discussion of diarrhea in this chapter as well. This is just annoying. I can't zoom in or anything. No, it's still not. It's still not letting me. I can't even bring up. I brought up the pen that one time, and then now it is not letting me use the pen at all. Or whatever. I don't know. Usually I can just drag down and it lets me do it, but it's not. It's really just not gonna let me do it. Okay. Anyways, moving on. I can't even zoom in or anything. Moving on. Diarrhea. So when we talk about diarrhea, we're talking about loose, watery stools. And anytime that your stool isn't in a solid form, that could be considered diarrhea. And then we're talking about multiple situations of loose, watery stools within a 24-hour period. So if you have at least 3 loose, watery stools within a 24-hour period, then we would consider that diarrhea. And once that progresses past 14 days, then past if you that continues for 14 days or longer, then that's chronic diarrhea. But anything less than 14 days would be acute. Um, Common causes of acute diarrhea. Usually it's going to be viral in nature. So that's the most common will be viruses like um, rotavirus and norovirus. Those are the most common viral causes of diarrhea, and the viral ones are the most common causes of diarrhea. Then after that, the most common bacterial causes of acute diarrhea are going to be things like Shigella and Salmonella, Campylobacter, and E. coli. Um, so Shigella can also produce toxins that can cause severe intestinal damage, leading to dysentery. And dysentery is where we start seeing bloody and mucus-filled diarrhea. So it's really that blood that's the characteristic, and it's usually caused from damage being caused in the intestinal tract. Clostridioides difficile, again, C. diff, used to be known as Clostridium difficile, also can lead to diarrhea, but it's more commonly associated with pseudomembranous colitis. So proper inflammation of the colon with colitis and formation of a pseudomembrane, which is caused from biofilms formed by the bacteria. This can lead to pretty significant inflammation and irritation, as well as blockages in the colon as a result of the bacteria. Then we have with E. coli, there's so many different strains of E. coli. It's wild. In the presentation, and I have it down here right below food poisoning. I have EAEC, which is enteroaggregative E. coli, which leads to chronic diarrhea. Or you could have diffusely adherent E. coli, which leads to urinary tract infections. And there's all sorts of other E. coli, including S-tech, which is Shiga toxin producing E. coli. And Shiga toxin producing E. coli produce the same toxin as Shigella, which the toxin is called Shiga toxin. And the Shiga toxin causes the intestinal damage that leads to dysentery associated with shigellosis, as well as this type of specific strain of E. coli. And while these are all E. coli, which is one species of bacteria, the different strains of E. coli all produce different kinds of toxins or virulence factors associated with their different types of presentation. So it just depends on what strain of E. coli you have that will lead to whatever type of diarrhea you might have, or whether you have dysentery, which is our bloody diarrhea. So we often use antigens known as H, O, and K antigens, which has to deal with the capsules and surface molecules and flagella and fimbriae that are on the surfaces of these molecules, of these bacteria. Because some of these organisms have different kinds of antigens on their surface, and this helps us differentiate between what type of bacteria is causing your diarrhea. For example, we can also look at motility of these guys because Shigella is non-motile. It doesn't have any flagella, whereas E. coli tends to be lophotrichous and Salmonella tends to be peritrichous. And so those are all different presentations of the flagella and the flagellar antigens and stuff like that that can help us differentiate between what is causing your diarrhea. One of the most common bacterial causes of diarrhea is Campylobacter. It's probably the most common bacterial foodborne infectious diarrhea cause. So we'll talk about what I mean with that distinction in a moment. But if your bacteria infection is causing the diarrhea, then the most common cause of that will be Campylobacter. Even though the numbers coming out of clinics might differ with that, most of the time it's not even diagnosed because most of the time people will have Campylobacter diarrhea for a few days and then recover from it just fine. And then your doctor never diagnoses it. So it's a pretty difficult one to diagnose and have on the books as how common it is. So anyways, the best way to treat diarrhea, hands down, is with fluids and electrolyte replacement, not necessarily with antibiotics. Most of the time, most people will clear out many of these infections naturally. It does depend on what's causing your infection. But the best treatment for diarrhea is just fluids and electrolyte replacement, especially with that. And there are a lot of talk right now, I've noticed in social media about people saying about being hydrated and that you can't hydrate unless you have electrolytes. And that's true and false at the same time. Your hydration comes from water and your electrolytes come from electrolytes. They are separate things, and you do need both of them to maintain homeostasis and maintain proper hydration. They're different and related, but they are different. So just keep that in mind as well. So you need fluids and electrolytes, for, because you need both of those things, but they are different. Um, Cholera is caused by another type of diarrheal disease. It is caused by a bacterium, Vibrio cholerae. It's a comma-shaped bacterium. It leads to rice water stools. Quite literally, the stool itself would look like rice water, clear whitish in color. And this is as a result of the A and B enterotoxins that are produced by the bacteria. These are lysogenic conversion genes that the bacteria got from a viral infection. And it produces these toxins that cause cells to release their electrolytes and fluids, massive electrolyte release and fluid release from the cells, leading to massive dehydration, and can be deadly. So that's cholera. It is fecal oral transmission. Then we have cryptosporidium. This is the first in our protozoal diarrheal diseases. And cryptosporidium, again, acute diarrhea typically. The cysts that are, remember, protozoa can have cyst form and they can have trophozoite form. Trophozoite is the active, multiplying, free living, eating, and all of that, producing toxins. The cyst is the dormant form. And the cyst form of cryptosporidium protozoa is resistant to chlorine, so even can live in chlorinated water. And so that can be transmitted easily within swimming pools, leading to acute diarrhea. Um, we can also see more chronic, we'll say the chronic diarrhea associated, like we said, with enteroaggregative E. coli, a specific strain of E. coli, leading to diarrhea lasting 14 days or longer, and certain other types of protozoa, not cryptosporidium, but other ones like Cyclospora, Giardia, and Entamoeba histolytica. Entamoeba histolytica is also associated with dysentery. So those guys are also associated with more chronic presentation of diarrhea lasting more than 14 days. For like I say, food poisoning. Food poisoning is a different thing. All these other forms of diarrhea that we've been talking about are related to being infected with these pathogens, whereas food poisoning is more associated with toxins that are produced by the bacteria, irrespective of being infected by the bacteria. So, for example, if you're prepping food and Staph aureus on the person's hand from normal biome or whatever gets on the food, the bacteria can grow enough to make toxins. Then the toxins will stay present on the food, even if you cook it further or freeze it or anything. You can get rid of the bacteria, but the toxins are heat resistant. The toxins are freezing resistant. And so once the toxins are present on the food, then if the person ingests the toxins make them sick. This is a self-limiting effect, though. So with food poisoning, again, it's resulting from the toxins, regardless of whether the bacteria are still present, the toxins are. And so the toxins lead to illness. And this can be vomiting, it can be diarrhea, and it can be cramping. But again, usually self-limiting. Once the toxin is eliminated, you're not at risk for being sick anymore. And it can't be transmitted from person to person either. So that's a good thing about it. These are whenever your illness lasts less than 24 hours. Or 24 hours, around that amount of time. And if you get sick within just a few hours of eating. So if you're sick within an hour to 6 hours after eating and your illness only lasts about 24 hours, it's more than likely going to be food poisoning associated with toxins. Self-limiting, there is no treatment for it. You just got to let it run its course. As opposed to the infectious diarrheas caused by the viral infections or the bacterial infections or the protozoal infections that we just discussed. Those ones are going to not appear in your body for at least 24 hours minimum. And usually more than a couple of days go by. And then you get sick, usually for several days to a couple of weeks or longer if you have chronic diarrhea, right? So that's the difference between those. Next is hepatitis. Hepatitis literally means inflammation of the liver. Hepato means liver and itis means inflammation. You can have hepatitis outside of having an infection, but here, of course, we're talking about infectious causes. The three types that we need to learn for this chapter will be type hepatitis A, B, and C. They're all caused by different viruses that are unrelated to one another. Um, Completely unrelated, but they cause a similar disease. Hepatitis A is a fecal oral transmission. So this is usually found in water or contaminated foods, transmitted as a result of fecal contamination, poor hand washing and hygiene and stuff like that. There is a vaccine available for it. Hepatitis A almost always is you're able to recover from it naturally with minimal treatment for otherwise healthy people. Whereas hepatitis B is even small amounts of blood can transmit it, but it is blood contact, sexually transmitted, and intravenous drug use, accidental needle sticks, stuff like that. Um, Hepatitis B, the virus is a DNA virus, but it also has reverse transcriptase, which I talked about in the final review, if you watched that one. There is a vaccine for hepatitis B, but there's no treatment for it, and it commonly can lead to cancer, liver cancer, as a result of the infection. Hepatitis C is a viral RNA virus transmitted by blood, but in this case, you do need it to be true blood transmission. So we're talking about intravenous drug use or accidental needle sticks, but sexual contact is not enough to transmit hepatitis C typically. There are antiviral treatments for hepatitis C, but the disease can be severe, and you do need to treat earlier on during the disease because progression can lead to it being more treatment resistant. So those are the three major types of viral hepatitis that we learned about in this chapter. The rest of the chapter focuses on our helminths. So just a reminder that helminths are multicellular eukaryotic organisms, and they're all parasites that we talk about, meaning that they cause damage to the host while they benefit from the host that they're infecting. Here, the helminths are going to be the parasitic worms. This includes several different species of the helminths. Um, this includes several different species of helminths. We have Enterobius. Oh, geez, I almost died. Enterobius vermicularis, which is our pinworms. Again, you'll have anal itching associated with this, and the eggs and the larvae and stuff can be transmitted under the fingernails from the itching and that sort of stuff. This is probably one of the more common helminth infections that we see in people in the United States is the pinworms. Next are the whipworms. These are also roundworms, small roundworms. This is caused by Trichuris trichuria. Next is Ascaris lumbricoides, the giant intestinal roundworm, which causes the most common helminth infection in the world. This is, again, it's a roundworm. So all of our roundworms fall into that category of nematoda. Just a reminder about that one. Tapeworms, these are flatworms. They fall into the platyhelminthes, and they're a subset of flatworms known as the cestodes. These are the tapeworms. We talked about several species of tapeworms in the chapter. The species we talked about were Diphyllobothrium latum, Hymenolepsis, and then Taenia species, most commonly Taenia solium. It's the most recognizable one. There are several species of Taenia that are flatworms that fall into this tapeworm category. All of these guys are flattened worms, quite literally, and they have these segments called proglottids, which contain the eggs for transmission. These segments can break off, and it's how that this is transmitted through the feces. But you can also get most of these guys from eating undercooked meat as well. Ingesting the eggs from the proglottids can actually lead to cysticercosis, and neurocysticercosis is whenever the cysts get embedded in the brain. And this is a very severe issue because if you break open the cysts that contain the worm in the brain tissue, it causes massive, almost instantaneous inflammation in the brain, leading to very, very unlikely that you will survive that situation. So it's pretty difficult to treat once you do have this situation. Next are the flukes, which are the Chinese liver flukes, and the schistosomes. Trichinosis is tapped in there too. Trichinosis is a disease that's associated with undercooked pork. caused by trichinella helminths. But back to the flukes. We have Opsithorchis sinensis and Clonorchis sinensis. Both of these fall into this kind of group that we call the Chinese liver flukes. These guys often live in the bile duct and can block bile release out of like the gallbladder, leading to pretty significant, similar pain as what you have with gallstones and pretty significant inflammation of the liver as a result of that. When the schistosomes are blood flukes, they actually can circulate throughout the bloodstream, but they can live in various tissues as well, can leading to splenomegaly, hepatomegaly, enlargement of the spleen and the liver, respectively. And they can even move into the bladder, which we talk about more in chapter 24, depending on the species of the schistosome. Schistosoma masoni and schistosoma japonicum are the ones that were more like blood related. Or there's another species, hematobium, that is associated more with the bladder stuff. These guys get in through intact skin in contaminated fresh water, and they have a life cycle step inside of snails. So, like, what happens is, there will be feces or urine that is contaminated with the worms or their larvae that gets into fresh water, and then there's a life cycle step that involves a snail, and then they release a certain form of these flukes called microfilariae, and these filaria move into your skin, literally through your intact skin, and it causes itchiness where they get in, which is what we call swimmer's itch, and then they migrate in through the tissues of the body and the bloodstream after that. These guys are pretty unique. They can alter the antigens on their surfaces to hide out from our immune system. Pretty crazy. So that is the gist of all of the diseases discussed in chapter 23. Next is chapter 24, which was our genitourinary system. The genitourinary system, we have biome that primarily includes lactobacillus. It can also include smaller numbers of Candida albicans, which is a fungus, right? It's a yeast, which is the type of fungus. And again, there's other bacteria that are commonly found in the biomes of females and in men. We do see similar microbiomes between females and men in the genital area. It's just women tend to have different ratios of different bacteria than men do because of the environment, right? Lactobacillus is definitely the predominant species, though, and the lactobacillus produces acid that is what makes the vaginal environment as acidic as it is, and lends to that, especially as we go through puberty. For both men and women, but in particular women, do we see shifts in our biome in response to the changes of the hormones in our bodies and stuff like that. So very dependent on hormonal changes, including, engagement in sexual activity can change your biome as well. Especially like primarily men, sexual activity can lead to major changes in that, whereas the females depends a little bit more on the hormonal changes, mucus production, and the monthly cycle, of course. We can even see shifts in the female microbiome in response to just the monthly reproductive cycles, hormonal cycles, menstruation, and see changes again with menopause and perimenopause and stuff like that. Men also, uncircumcised men tend to have a different biome that lends to more inflammation, and that naturally has nothing to do with hygiene. It's just a natural biome associated with being uncircumcised, lends to more inflammation, which makes them more susceptible to sexually transmitted infections. In this chapter, we talk about some things that are sexually transmitted and some things that aren't. For the things that are not necessarily associated with sexual activity, we have urinary tract infections, leptospirosis, vaginitis, and group B strep. Okay. So with urinary tract infections, 80%, if not more than that, of urinary tract infections are caused by E. coli, Escherichia coli. And oftentimes, especially for women, it's from your own E. coli, from your own microbiome, usually from your own, anus, your own rectum. And it's a hygiene issue, usually related to actual hygiene care, and women are encouraged to wipe from front to back to prevent contamination from back to front. But also sexual activity can lead to a lot of mishmashing around of microbiomes from different parts, and that can lend to that. For men, it tends to be related more to improper hygiene as opposed to just care, personal care. And regular bathroom maintenance, but poor hygiene as well as unprotected anal sex, it's going to increase the likelihood of urinary tract infections for men. Urinary tract infections in men can also lead to prostatitis because the urethra can branch off towards the prostate, and then lead to infection. So prostatitis is usually associated to progression related to similar microbes associated with the urinary tract infections. Again, GI flora usually leading to that. Then leptospirosis is a zoonotic disease transmitted through the urine primarily. We have the leptospirosis phase and an immune phase. The leptospirosis phase is severe flu-like symptoms, while the immune phase can lead to progression to meningitis and even death. High levels of inflammation associated with the immune phase there. It's transmitted to bacteria, Leptospira interrogans, that is transmitted in urine of animals. People can get it, animals can get it. There are vaccines available for pets, so please vaccinate your pets. For vaginitis, the form of vaginitis caused by yeast infections is usually associated with Candida albicans. Again, vaginitis implies itis, inflammation of the vagina. So if the vaginal tissues themselves are inflamed, this is what vaginitis is. And when it's caused by infection from overgrowth of yeast, Candida albicans is usually the culprit there, often a result of a shift in the vaginal microbiome, either from sexual activity or from taking antibiotics or hormonal changes and stuff like that. So that would be unrelated to a sexually transmitted infection. But if you get vaginitis as a result of Trichomonas vaginalis, which is a protozoal, sexually transmitted protozoal infection, then that is a sexually transmitted form of vaginitis. So those are the two main causes of vaginitis. Vaginosis is whenever you have overgrowth of the wrong kinds of bacteria, usually also part of your normal microbiome. But again, hormonal shifts or sexual activity can lead to a change in which microbes are associated in your microbiome. So instead of lactobacillus being your predominant, then we might have other things like Gardnerella or something like that overgrowing. And then that would lead to bacterial vaginosis. Bacterial vaginosis, again, you have infection in the vagina that can lead to, discharge and smells associated with vaginosis, but usually not associated with inflammation of the vaginal tissue itself. Um, okay. Next, sorry, I got an email. Next, we have gonorrhea and chlamydia. We often see chlamydia joining along with gonorrhea. These guys often go hand in hand. I'm not going to lie. Both of them are bacterial infections. Gonorrhea is caused by a gram-negative diplococci called the gonococcus, and its scientific name is Neisseria gonorrhoeae. And chlamydia is caused by the bacterium Chlamydia trachomatis. And this particular subspecies that causes chlamydia, the STI chlamydia, is a different subspecies than the Chlamydia trachomatis. They're both Chlamydia trachomatis, but one subtype causes chlamydia. The other subtype is associated with trachoma, which is blindness. They both can cause the same thing, but one's more common. It's kind of like when we talk about herpes in a little bit, okay? So they can have dual infection associations, but usually different subtypes or subspecies, different serotypes are associated with the different infections. Because remember, trachoma is the leading infectious cause of blindness in the world, and it's also caused by Chlamydia trachomatis bacterial infection. That's usually due to inflammation in the eyelid, leading to what is it called? The cornea being abrasions on the cornea, leading to blindness eventually after that. So still chlamydia trachomatis, but that's trachoma. Here, chlamydia is just the sexually transmitted infection. It is the most common of the reportable STIs. Now, this is where we take a little bit of a step back just to talk about the fact that when we talk about Trichomonas vaginalis, that is a protozoal infection. It is more common than chlamydia, but it's not reportable. We don't track it, but we do track chlamydia outbreaks. Why would we track chlamydia and gonorrhea, but not trichomonas? And it has to deal with the relation of gonorrhea and chlamydia to leading to pelvic inflammatory disease and salpingitis, which is inflammation of the fallopian tube. So those are associated with gonorrhea and with chlamydia. Not everybody gets pelvic inflammatory disease or salpingitis with those, but they can. And salpingitis can lead to scarring of the fallopian tubes and inflammation of the fallopian tubes. That can lead to increased incidence of ectopic pregnancies, which can be life-threatening. So that's why we track those things. These diseases can be pretty dangerous if they're left to progress for too long. They are treatable with antibiotics, but there are strains of gonorrhea that are completely untreatable now, leading for us to have to develop new antibiotics in the hopes that we can contain the spread of these types of infections in the future. All right, moving on to syphilis. Bringing up the Tuskegee study, this is where there were African American males that were illiterate that were asked to sign on to a medical study, and they were not told that their syphilis would be left untreated and observed over time. Intentionally untreated. This is a study that went on for more than 40 years in America. And a lot of these men died from dementia and things like that, just to track and see what would happen to them, even though treatment was available and these people could be cured. Again, yeah, it's an ugly part of American history that shouldn't be forgotten. Syphilis is caused by a gram-negative bacterium called Treponema pallidum. What place that it gets in, so when you have sexual contact with somebody that has syphilis, there's a 33% chance that you're going to get the syphilis, okay? Where the bacteria gets in, it forms a small sore called a chancre. It's a little sore. It's a hard, small, raised lesion, and usually painless on the genitals or the mouth or wherever the bacteria gets in. So that's the primary stage of syphilis. The secondary stage of syphilis leads to a very characteristic brownish rash that we see on the palms and the soles of the feet, and eventually develops on the trunk of the body. We also will see sore throat, lymphadenopathy, fever. Lymphadenopathy means swollen lymph nodes that you can palpate. And so that's usually the secondary. Once you've progressed to that, you're in secondary. And this is the most likely stage. Primary and secondary stages are the most likely stage they're going to get diagnosed around modern age now at times, because most people see that and they've usually gone to the doctor for one of those conditions. We rarely see it progressing to the tertiary stage anymore, but it used to be more common when there didn't used to be a treatment for syphilis. Nowadays, syphilis is treated with penicillin. Penicillin G, which is delivered via shot intramuscularly. It usually takes 2 shots. They can be delivered simultaneously. Anyways, so this is tertiary syphilis. If it progresses that far, we can see neurosyphilis developing. We can see blindness. We can see dementia. And we also see development of gummas, which are essentially like degradation of tissue that are tumor-like developments, eating kind of away at the tissue. This can be the skin or the muscle underneath associated with that. It's very disfiguring at that point in time. Syphilis can be transmitted congenitally, so this would be vertical transmission from mother to baby, and it can lead to significant issues with the fetus. We can have fetal abnormalities, even leading to miscarriage and stillbirth as a result of it. Syphilis can also become latent. So you might develop secondary syphilis and then it becomes latent in the body and just hide out in the tissues. It could still be transmitted during that time, but you might not have any more signs and symptoms for a period before it develops into tertiary syphilis. All right, moving on to chancroid. This is caused by a bacterium called Haemophilus ducreyi. It's a gram-negative bacillus. This is a sexually transmitted infection that has a soft chancre associated with it. It's more gooey, more soft, and it's a little bit larger than what we see with syphilis. And it doesn't have any progression into the secondary or tertiary phase. It just is associated with the chancre. In women, it can often go unnoticed, but in men, it's usually a very painful lesion. Next, the most common STI in the world, period, hands down, is human papillomavirus, HPV. There are so many different strains. of HPV. There's like hundreds of different strains of HPV. Most strains of HPV, well, probably most of them don't have any signs or symptoms. The ones that have signs and symptoms cause warts, and any wart on the whole body can be caused by HPV. If you have gotten a wart in your life, it was caused by HPV, human papillomavirus. Genital warts are specific strains of HPV that will cause warts more commonly in the genitals, as opposed to the ones that you might have on your hands or your feet or somewhere else on the body. But they're all caused by HPV. Then there are several strains of HPV that are associated with cancer, and we see it more commonly discussed as cervical cancer. It's not just cervical cancer, though. It can be associated with cancer in other parts of the body. So anal cancer, throat cancer, still usually transmitted sexually, but it's still relevant, right? And so talking about that, cervical cancer is the most common presentation of it, but we can also see it in other areas of the body, including the penis and the anus and the mouth and the throat and stuff like that. There are vaccinations for the most common strains of HPV that can lead to cervical cancer and some of them to genital warts. That we see talk about with the Gardasil vaccines. Okay, the best way to prevent cervical cancer, I mean, we could say, of course, abstinence, but the best way really to prevent from it is, using condoms, but also then screening for it with Pap smears. And Pap smears can find abnormal cells well before they progress into developing into cancer, and so we could treat it earlier on and then prevent it from becoming into cancer after that. So that's the best way to screen for that. Herpes. There are two major types of herpes virus, HSV1 and HSV2. Both of them can cause both oral and genital herpes. Having HSV1 does not protect you from getting HSV2. Having HSV2 does not protect you from getting HSV1. You can have both strains or just one or the other. Okay. HSV1 is more commonly associated with oral herpes, and HSV2 is more commonly associated with genital herpes, but they can be found both and cause same signs and symptoms in both areas. Whenever HSV is transmitted vertically from the mother to the baby while giving birth, it can lead to an 80% mortality rate if the virus gets into the central nervous system, and still we're looking at somewhere around 40% mortality rate associated with it and getting in to other areas. Significant issues. It's a lifelong HSV infection after that. There is no cure for herpes. It is lifelong. It hides out in the nerves, in the ganglion of nerves, and reemerges whenever there's stress, either immune stress or emotional stress, physical stress, whatever, will lead to reemergence of the virus and then exhibition of those vesicles that are associated with a herpes outbreak. Yes. Okay. We already talked, like I mentioned group B strep, but this at the bottom of this on here. So again, this is not sexually transmitted infection. Group B strep. This includes Streptococcus agalactiae, which is most commonly what is associated with this issue. Streptococcus species here, they are a normal part of the microbiome. About 10 to 40% of women harbor them naturally as part of their microbiome, but they can transmit those bacteria to the baby during birth. It's not outgrowing or anything abnormal in the woman. It's just existing in the woman. But it gets to the baby either through the nose or the mouth, and it can lead to pretty severe illness in the baby, including meningitis. It can lead to hearing loss and all sorts of stuff like that. It's life-threatening complications as a result of infection with group B strep. So we test women late in their pregnancy to see if they have this strep. And if they do, then we usually will administer antibiotics to control the population in the woman before she gives birth to make birth safe. All right, so moving on to our most missed topics from these chapters, starting with chapter 23, is hepatitis A. I talked about the differences between hepatitis A, B, and C in my final review, which is posted on Canvas for you guys. There's the recording and the slides for it, and I highly recommend that you review that there. This slide has a little more information specifically about hepatitis A if you are interested. But just a reminder, Hep A is transmitted through fecal oral route Most people recover naturally without any specific intervention medically. And most people don't even get jaundice or other signs or symptoms associated with having hepatitis. So it's unlikely, actually. Only about 10% of people who have Hep A will even have jaundice. And again, most people just recover naturally. So, anyways, moving on. We're going to start with our questions and stuff about that. So, what is the primary mode of transmission for hepatitis A? It is fecal oral. Blood and body fluids is more hepatitis B. Hepatitis C is really just true blood transmission, intravenous drug use, or accidental needle sticks for Hep C. Blood and body fluids is Hep B. And then fecal oral is going to be Hep A. So in your contaminated food or your contaminated water, it's found pretty commonly. It's a pretty common one. There is vaccination available for it, though. Which of the following is true about hepatitis A? Does it cause chronic liver disease? Almost never. If you are an otherwise healthy person, you should recover naturally from this. It won't even have even temporary jaundice associated with that. Can it be prevented with a vaccine? It can. There are hepatitis A vaccines. Is it transmitted through blood and sexual contact? No, that is hepatitis B. Is it treated with antiviral medications? It almost never needs to be. You will almost always recover naturally from this if you are otherwise healthy. For chapter 23, our next topic was the schistosomes. Schistosoma species, including Schistosoma masoni, as well as japonicum. These guys are flukes. They get in through intact skin and contaminated fresh water. They have that snail as the intermediate, and it leads to blood flukes. So blood transmission here. So they live in the blood and then also can move into the liver and the spleen and cause tissue damage from the flukes being present in the body. So here are our questions about the schistosomes. How do they infect humans? Do they get in through contaminated food? No, not these guys. They get in B, by penetrating the skin during contact with contaminated fresh water. And there is an intermediate snail life cycle step there. Do we get them through airborne spores in the lungs? No, that sounds more like a fungal infection. None of the protozoa are transmitted airborne. That's not how they're typically transmitted that way. I'm not saying none, but none of the ones that we learn about in our class, okay? But do they get transmitted from contact through infected animals? Again, no, that's not typically how schistosomes are going to be transmitted. It's through water, and then they migrate in through your intact skin, causing that swimmer's itch. What type of organisms are schistosoma? This type of question is a pretty common type of question that you will see on my final exam from Unit 4. What type of organism is schistosoma? It's a fluke. On here, what are flukes also known as? They are not going to be nematoda. Those were our roundworms. They're not going to be they are platyhelminthes, which are flatworms, but they're a more specific type of flatworm. Not cestoda, because cestoda is our tapeworms. Flukes are known as trematoda. So just our little mini walkthrough there. And if you need me to break that stuff down more, I did cover it in the final review. So schistosomes are flukes, which are known as trematoda. They are not roundworms, like Ascaris lumbricoides. Roundworms, also known as the nematodes. They are not protozoa, like Giardia and other types of protozoa, like Trichomonas. And they're not tapeworms, not like Taenia is a tapeworm, not like Diphyllobothrium is a tapeworm. All right, moving on to chapter 24, our genitourinary diseases. HPV, human papillomavirus, the number one sexually transmitted infection in the whole world. We estimate probably over 90% of all sexually active adults will have had HPV at some point. You more than likely had it and cleared it without any signs or symptoms. You may or may not have had genital warts. It's uncommon. You may or may not have had issues with abnormal cervical cells. Pap smear screens for that. And most people will clear it naturally eventually. You don't keep it forever, okay? it is transmitted through sexual contact. It was also transmitted through skin-to-skin contact, non-sexual contact. This is also the cause of warts, period. So FYI. How is HPV transmitted? Skin-to-skin contact, sometimes sexually related. Okay, so that's C. It's not transmitted through the air or through food and water, or by typically sharing personal items like towels. When we're talking about HPV transmission, it usually requires actual skin-to-skin contact. The virus doesn't survive well outside of the body. Which of the following is true about HPV infections? Most HPV infections cause immediate symptoms. That is incorrect. In fact, most of them do not cause any signs or symptoms. B, all HPV infections lead to cancer. That is incorrect. Most don't have any signs or symptoms or cancer associated with them. It's usually a silent infection. C, the majority of HPV infections clear up on their own without causing harm. That is correct. C would be our correct answer. D, HPV can only be spread through vaginal intercourse. That is incorrect. Any skin-to-skin contact. All right, next is this is our final concept to cover for this review, is syphilis and the different stages of syphilis. Primary syphilis is usually associated with the chancre, which is a painless, small sore or ulcer, usually at the site where the bacteria got into the body. Again, it's caused by the bacterium Treponema pallidum. It's a gram-negative spiral-shaped bacterium. The chancre usually heals on its own within 3 to 6 weeks, and then you would progress to the secondary stage more often if you have not gotten in treatment by that point. If you progress to the secondary stage, what we will see is a rash. There can be mucus patches in the mouth, which I mentioned previously, but is associated with that. And usually just flu-like symptoms, swollen lymph nodes called lymphadenopathy, a fever, a sore throat, stuff like that. And this can last weeks to months. And again, usually will eventually go away. If the infection is still present, though, you may go latent after that, or you may go to the tertiary stage. If you go latent, the bacteria are present in the body, but you won't have signs or symptoms, but you can still transmit the illness. Some people go on to the tertiary stage, which may happen after years of being latent, or it may happen directly after the secondary stage. Depends on your immune system and how your body's dealing with this bacteria. In the tertiary stage, we will have damage to the organs. And so here's where we start to see the development of those gummas, which are like tumor-like growths that eat away at the tissue, often the skin, the fascia, the musculature underneath. And we can start having damage to internal organs and then neurological issues that can lead to blindness and dementia. And it can be fatal if it is left untreated. The best treatment for syphilis is penicillin, intramuscularly delivered. Better earlier on because once you have the damage that's done to it, that damage can be lasting damage. So what characteristic is the sign of the primary stage? The painful rash. The rash is associated with the secondary stage of syphilis. It is a painful ulcer. B is our answer. It's called a chancre. C, swollen lymph nodes. Again, that is usually associated with secondary syphilis. And D, mucus patches in the mouth. Again, associated with secondary syphilis. Our correct answer is B, the chancre, the painless ulcer, which is the site where the bacteria infected the body. Our next question, which stage of syphilis is characterized by flu-like symptoms, a rash, and mucus patches, in case you weren't paying attention with my previous explanation? This is secondary syphilis. Primary syphilis is going to be just that chancre at the site where the bacteria got in. Latent syphilis, you're having no signs or symptoms, even though you're still contagious and you're still harboring the bacteria. It's that period of time where we have no signs or symptoms. And then tertiary syphilis is where we start seeing the development of the gummas. We start seeing development of neurological symptoms and damage to tissues in the body and eventually death. So when you see flu-like symptoms and a rash and maybe mucus patches in the mouth, that is secondary syphilis. All right, that is it for my review of chapters 23 and 24. Do I have any questions from any of you guys who are joining me today? All right. If I don't have any questions, That's it for my review of chapter 23 and 24. I will post this in the weekly reviews discussion module on you guys' Canvas pages. And remember that you have my final review of the most missed topics on my final exam from previous semesters. That is available for you guys in Canvas as well in your finals week module on Canvas. So happy studying, you guys. Email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you at 4 p.m. on Sunday for our Kahoot gameplay to review. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.